The silence of the National Mall was suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic crunch of Zailie's worn sneakers against the frost-covered gravel. At just 10 years old, Zailie had learned that the shadows between the giant marble monuments of the District of Columbia were the safest places to hide from a world that didn't see her. She wasn't looking for trouble tonight. She was only looking for a warm vent near the Smithsonian, but what she found instead was a pair of glowing emerald eyes staring out from the hollow of a frozen hedgerow. It was a cat, ink black and sleek despite the cold, sitting with a terrifyingly human stillness that made Zailie's breath hitch in her chest. "You're cold, aren't you?" she whispered, her small dark hand trembling as she reached into the brush, but the cat didn't move. It simply lowered its head, revealing a heavy, obsidian collar that pulsed with a faint, rhythmic violet light. If you're ready to see how a small girl and a stray cat topple an empire, hit that subscribe button and join the pack now. The journey is just beginning. As her fingers brushed the silk-soft fur, a fleet of silver-armored SUVs roared onto the restricted lawn, their engines growling like hungry beasts. Zailie dove behind a marble pillar, clutching the cat to her chest, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against the animal's steady, vibrating purr. 3 men stepped out, led by a man whose presence felt like a physical weight. Vane Sterling, a man whose name was whispered in fear from the back alleys of D.C. to the high-rise penthouses of Tokyo. "The feline has the biometric key," Vane said, his voice a cold blade that sliced through the winter air, "and the brat who's holding it is now a liability we can't afford." Zailie didn't wait for him to finish. She knew the look of a predator and she bolted toward the shadow of the Lincoln Memorial, the cat surprisingly heavy and warm in her arms. But she didn't know the truth yet. The cat wasn't just carrying a key, it was the biological vessel for the coordinates to the Solomon Trust, a forgotten fortune that could bankrupt the world's 7 largest crime syndicates. Behind her, the soft thud-thud-thud of silenced rounds splintered the marble inches from her head, sending a spray of white dust into her hair. She scrambled into the labyrinthine basement of the monument, her small frame the only reason she could fit through the narrow maintenance crawlspace. The cat let out a low melodic trill and suddenly the heavy iron door at the end of the hall, which had been locked for decades, swung open with a hiss of pneumatic pressure. Zailie slid inside just as a gloved hand reached for her ankle, the heavy door slamming shut with a finality that echoed through the stone. She was safe for a moment, but as she looked around the hidden chamber, she realized she wasn't alone. Standing in the center of the room, surrounded by monitors showing every street corner in the city, was Kalen Thorne, the deadliest rival to the Sterling Empire, his eyes widening as he saw the cat in the girl's arms. "You have no idea what you've just walked into, kid," Kalen said, his hand moving toward the holstered weapon at his hip. Zailie squeezed the cat tighter, her chin lifting with a defiance that stopped the hitman in his tracks. "He chose me," she said, her voice small but unbreakable, "and if you want him, you have to go through me." The cat jumped from her arms, walking toward Kalen with a slow, predatory confidence, and as it stepped into a beam of light, the shadow it cast on the wall wasn't a cat at all, it was the silhouette of a towering, ancient guardian. Kalen's face went pale, his weapon dropping an inch as the cat let out a sound that wasn't a meow, but a deep, resonant hum that vibrated in Zailie's very bones. This was only the beginning of a war that would burn the city to the ground. The air in the hidden bunker beneath the Lincoln Memorial tasted of ionized salt and ancient dust, vibrating with the low-frequency hum of the cat, now identified by the glowing collar as the Archivist. While Kalen Thorne stood paralyzed by the impossible shadow stretching across the limestone wall. Zailie clutched the cat closer, her small fingers disappearing into its midnight fur, sensing the shift in Kalen's energy from lethal predator to stunned witness as the heavy steel doors groaned under the rhythmic battering of Vane Sterling's breaching team outside. "The shadow, it's not an optical illusion, it's a genetic projection," Kalen muttered, his voice shaking with a realization that clearly terrified him, before he lunged forward not to grab the cat, but to seize Zailie's shoulder and pull her toward a narrow maintenance shaft hidden behind a rack of humming servers. Every 5 seconds, the ground shuddered from an explosive charge, and every 5 seconds, Zailie felt the cat's heart beat in perfect synchronization with her own, a terrifyingly calm pulse that seemed to whisper of ancient fortunes and blood-soaked legacies. They tumbled into the dark, sliding down a grease-slicked chute that dumped them into a waiting submersible docked in the icy waters of the Potomac River, the transition so jarringly fast that Zailie barely had time to scream before the hatch hissed shut. Kalen was a blur of motion, his hands dancing across a holographic interface as the vessel detached, diving deep into the murky depths just as a massive explosion rippled through the water above, marking the destruction of the chamber they had occupied seconds ago. "Why are they trying to kill us if the cat is so important?" Zailie gasped, her eyes wide as she watched the sonar screen light up with the signatures of 3 pursuing craft, her voice trembling but her grip on the animal never wavering. Kalen didn't look back, his jaw set in a hard line that spoke of a man who had seen too many friends die for the very secret he was now carrying. They don't want the cat, kid. They want the decryption sequence buried in its DNA, and once they have it, the Guardian is disposable and so are you, he replied, his words hitting her like a physical blow as the submersible surged forward, leaving the District of Columbia behind and heading toward the hidden coastline of Connecticut. The journey was a blur of high-speed maneuvers and suffocating silence, the tension in the cabin rising like a tide as they bypassed naval sensors and slipped into a private cove shielded by the towering cliffs of a billionaire's estate. As they stepped out onto a secluded pier, the salt air of the Long Island Sound biting at Zailie's face, she realized they weren't alone. Standing at the end of the dock was a woman whose elegance was as sharp as a razor, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit. This was Isolde Vesper, the second of the deadliest bosses, a woman who controlled the flow of information across the Atlantic and who looked at Zailie not with pity, but with the cold calculation of a chess grandmaster. "You brought the girl," Isolde said, her voice a melodic purr that was somehow more frightening than Vane Sterling's growl. "But did you bring her sister, or did you leave Leora to rot in the Sterling holding cells?" Zailie's heart stopped at the mention of her older sister, the only person who had ever truly protected her, and she lunged toward Isolde, her fear replaced by a sudden, scorching rage. "Where is she? What did you do with Leora?" Zailie demanded, but the cat suddenly leaped from her arms, landing with a heavy thud between her and the Mafia queen, its emerald eyes flashing with a warning that froze everyone in place. The cat began to pace in a perfect circle, its paws leaving glowing footprints on the wooden planks, and as it walked, a holographic map projected from its collar, hovering in the air like a ghost. It wasn't just a map of the fortune, it was a real-time feed of a high-security facility in Massachusetts, and there, displayed on the shimmering screen, was Leora, chained to a chair in a room filled with white light. But that was only the beginning. The map shifted again, revealing that the forgotten fortune wasn't gold or cash, but a series of weaponized satellites capable of resetting the world's financial markets with a single keystroke. Kalen stepped back, his face pale as he looked from the map to the small girl standing defiantly in the wind. "The fortune isn't just money," he whispered, "it's the power to erase every debt, every bank and every government on the planet." Zailie looked at the screen, her eyes fixed on her sister's face, and she knew then that she wasn't just a girl with a stray cat anymore. She was the trigger for a global revolution. "We're going to get her," Zailie said, her voice ringing with a strength that made even Isolde blink in surprise, "and if anyone tries to stop me, I'll let the cat show you why they call him the Guardian." Isolde smiled then, a genuine, terrifying expression of respect, and reached for her phone to call in the heaviest hitters in her private army. "Then we move tonight," Isolde commanded, "before Vane realizes we have the girl and the map, because once he knows, he'll burn the entire state of Connecticut to find us." What she said next changed everything as she leaned down to whisper in Zailie's ear, "Your sister isn't just a prisoner, Zailie, she's the only person who knows how to activate the biometric lock on that map, and without her, the cat is just a beautiful piece of jewelry." The weight of the situation settled on Zailie's shoulders, a crushing pressure that threatened to break her, yet she looked down at the cat who was now sitting calmly at her feet, and felt a surge of unbreakable resolve. They were being hunted by the deadliest people on Earth. Her sister was a pawn in a game of global dominance, and the only friend she had was a creature of myth and shadow. Every second they stayed on the dock was a second closer to their discovery, and as a distant drone hummed in the gray sky, Zailie knew their sanctuary was already compromised. He didn't know the truth yet, but Kalen was already planning his own betrayal, his eyes lingering on the cat with a hunger that hinted at a deeper, darker agenda. They boarded a blacked-out transport van, the engine purring with a predatory growl as they sped away from the coast, heading toward the heart of the storm. The staircase of suspense was climbing higher with every mile, the emotional stakes becoming a jagged mountain they had to scale or die trying. Zailie watched the trees flash by, her hand resting on the cat's head, wondering if she would ever see a normal day again or if she was destined to be the queen of a world built on secrets and blood. But as they crossed the border into New York, the cat let out a sharp, urgent trill, and the van's tires screeched as the driver slammed on the brakes, the road ahead blocked by a wall of fire. The heat from the wall of fire licked at the windshield of the transport van, the orange glow illuminating the terror in Zailie's eyes as she felt the Archivist, the cat, dig its claws into her denim, not out of fear, but as a bracing anchor against the chaos exploding around them. "Out! Move now or burn with the steel." Kalen roared, his voice barely audible over the roar of the inferno as he kicked the side door open, grabbing Zailie by the scruff of her jacket and swinging her into the freezing air of the New York-Massachusetts border. They hit the asphalt hard, the cat leaping with feline precision onto a nearby guardrail, its emerald eyes reflecting the flames with an eerie, knowing calm that suggested it had seen cities burn before. If you're hooked on this high-stakes rescue, don't forget to smash that like button and stay tuned to see if Zailie saves her sister. The fire wasn't just a barrier, it was a hunting ground, and as the smoke cleared, a figure emerged from the treeline that made even Isolde Vesper's blood run cold. Jackson Rowe, the legendary ghost of Seoul, a man whose syndicate controlled the shadow ports of the Pacific and who moved with a lethal, fluid grace that suggested he was more machine than man. He wasn't wearing tactical gear. He was in a sharp, obsidian-colored suit that seemed to swallow the light, his eyes fixed on the cat with a hunger that was almost spiritual. The Archivist doesn't belong to the street, and it certainly doesn't belong to a child of the slums, Jackson said, his voice a smooth, terrifying silk that carried clearly over the crackle of the flames. Zailie stood her ground, her small frame silhouetted against the fire, her hand finding the cat's head as it began to emit that low-frequency hum once more vibrating through the soles of her shoes. "He chose me because I'm the only one who doesn't want to use him like a weapon," Zailie countered, her voice surprisingly steady for a 10-year-old facing the deadliest man in the Eastern Hemisphere. Jackson didn't argue. He simply raised a hand and suddenly the shadows around the road began to move, revealing a dozen elite assassins equipped with thermographic visors and silenced submachine guns. But that was only the beginning of the nightmare. Before the first shot could be fired, the cat let out a sound, a high-pitched digital shriek that bypassed the ears and vibrated directly in the brain, and the streetlights for 3 miles in every direction shattered simultaneously. In the sudden, absolute darkness, Zailie felt a cold hand grab hers, pulling her toward the dense woods of the Berkshire Mountains. It was Kalen, his breathing heavy, his survival instincts overriding his greed for the fortune as he realized Jackson Rowe wasn't here to negotiate. He was here to harvest. "We have to reach the facility in Massachusetts before the sun comes up," Kalen hissed, "because once Jackson's satellite network recalibrates to the dark, we'll be glowing like neon signs in a graveyard." They ran through the thick underbrush, branches tearing at Zailie's clothes, but she didn't feel the pain, only the desperate need to reach Leora before the men in suits realized her sister was the only human key to the Solomon Trust. What she said next changed everything as they huddled in the hollow of an ancient oak tree. "The cat? It's showing me things, Kalen. It's showing me the codes inside the fire." Kalen froze, staring at the girl as the cat's collar projected a rapid-fire sequence of numbers onto the dark bark of the tree, a stream of data that shouldn't have been visible to the naked eye. He didn't know the truth yet, but Zailie wasn't just a protector. She was becoming a conduit, her unique neurosignature somehow syncing with the cat's biological hardware. This revelation made her more valuable than the fortune itself, and Kalen's grip on his weapon tightened. A subtle shift in his posture that told Zailie her ally was now contemplating whether to save her or sell her to the highest bidder. The staircase of suspense climbed higher as they heard the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of Jackson's private helicopter hovering just above the treeline, its powerful spotlight cutting through the canopy like a searchlight in a prison yard. "The facility is 2 miles north, disguised as a decommissioned research lab near the Connecticut River," Kalen whispered, his eyes darting between the sky and the girl, "but it's guarded by Jackson's primary rival, a man who makes Vane Sterling look like a saint." Every 10 seconds, the forest illuminated with the sweep of the helicopter's light, and every 10 seconds, Zailie felt the cat's tail twitch against her arm, guiding her through the dark with a telepathic certainty that defied logic. They reached the perimeter fence, a 20-foot barrier of electrified steel, but as Zailie approached, the cat jumped onto the control box, and with a simple touch of its paw, the humming current died instantly. They slipped through the gap, the industrial complex looming ahead like a concrete tomb, and Zailie saw the flicker of a camera lens tracking their every move from the shadows of the roof. "Leora is in the sublevel, in the room with the red door," Zailie whispered, her heart breaking at the mental image the cat was broadcasting into her mind. Her sister, pale and trembling, being forced to place her hand on a biometric scanner that refused to accept her print. He didn't know the truth yet, but the scanner wasn't looking for Leora's fingerprint. It was looking for the specific pattern of a heartbeat that only Zailie possessed. They reached the service entrance, Kalen taking out the 2 guards with a silent, brutal efficiency that made Zailie look away, but as they stepped into the sterile, white-lit hallway, the air suddenly grew cold. Standing at the end of the corridor was a man Zailie hadn't seen before, older, with silver hair and a suit that cost more than the apartment she had grown up in, Dominic Vance, the true architect of the Solomon Trust and the man who had created the guardian cat in a secret lab in California decades ago. "Welcome home, number 704, Dominic said, his eyes fixed on Zailie with a paternal warmth that was more chilling than Jackson Rowe's coldness. "I've been waiting a long time to see how the sink would hold in a high-stress environment." Zailie's world tilted on its axis as she realized the cat hadn't found her by accident. She had been part of the experiment since the day she was born. But that was only the beginning of the betrayal. Kalen stepped away from her, lowering his gun and bowing his head to the silver-haired man. "The delivery is complete, Mr. Vance," Kalen said, his voice devoid of the warmth he had shown on the boat. Zailie stood alone in the hallway, the cat arched and hissing at her side, as the red door at the end of the hall opened to reveal Leora, her eyes wide with a warning she couldn't scream. "Run, Zailie." Leora finally found her voice, but it was too late. The floor beneath Zailie's feet turned into a high-speed elevator, plunging her and the cat into the heart of the machine. The elevator didn't just drop. It plummeted, a gut-wrenching descent into the subterranean bowels of the Massachusetts facility that left Zailie's stomach hovering somewhere near her throat while the Archivist sat perfectly still, its claws retracted but its emerald eyes burning with a cold, digital fire. "Do you feel it yet, Zailie? The way the air thrums when you're close to the source." Dominic Vance's voice echoed through the speaker system, sounding less like a man and more like a ghost haunting his own machine. Zailie leaned against the cold steel wall, her fingers tangled in the cat's fur, feeling a strange rhythmic pulsing under her skin that matched the flickering lights of the elevator car. If this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, make sure to drop a comment below and subscribe to join the pack. We're just getting to the heart of the mystery. The doors hissed open to reveal a sprawling glass and chrome rotatory, a laboratory that looked like it had been carved out of a diamond, where Leora stood behind a shimmering energy field, her face tear-streaked and her hands pressed against the barrier. "Zailie, get out of here. They don't want the cat, they want the bridge." Leora screamed, but her voice was dampened by the sound of heavy boots echoing from the opposite corridor. Kalen Thorne stood at the edge of the glass, his eyes averted, looking like a man who had sold his soul and realized the currency was worthless. But that was only the beginning. From the shadows of the three main entrances, the power players emerged like sharks scenting blood in the water. Vane Sterling, his face purple with rage, Isolde Vesper, her elegance now replaced by a sharp, predatory focus, and Jackson Rowe, who moved with a silence that was louder than a gunshot. The three deadliest mafia bosses in the world were now in the same room, separated only by their mutual greed and the small girl holding a cat. "The girl is the terminal," Dominic Vance announced, his image appearing on a massive holographic screen above the center pedestal. She was engineered with a dormant neural link that only activates when she bonds with the Archivist, creating a bio-bridge to the Solomon Trust. Zailie felt the cat's vibration intensify, a low hum that turned into a piercing whistle in her ears, and suddenly the holographic map from the dock reappeared, but this time it was 10 times larger, filling the entire room with a golden, shifting grid of global assets. Vane Sterling stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of a high-tech blade. "The deal was that whoever brings the girl gets the codes, Vance. Now open the gate," he demanded, but Isolde Vesper simply laughed, a cold, crystalline sound that made the air feel like ice. "You think you can manage a global reset, Vane? You can barely manage a street gang in D.C., she mocked, her own guards leveling their weapons at Sterling's men. The tension in the room was a physical weight, a staircase of suspense where every breath was a step closer to a massacre. What she said next changed everything. Zailie looked at her sister, then at the men who saw her as nothing more than a key, and she felt a surge of power that didn't belong to her, it belonged to the cat. "You all talk like I'm not here," Zailie said, her voice dropping an octave, resonating with a metallic edge that made Jackson Rowe stop in his tracks. "You want the fortune? You want the satellites? Then come and take them from the Guardian." The cat let out a roar, not a meow but a deep, primal sound that shattered the glass energy field holding Leora. He didn't know the truth yet, but Kalen Thorne was the first to realize the cat wasn't protecting Zailie, it was obeying her. The golden grid of the Solomon Trust began to spin faster, the coordinates shifting from financial banks to the very weapons the mafia bosses had used to climb to the top. Every 5 seconds a new system went dark, Sterling's offshore accounts, Vesper's communication network, Rowe's smuggling fleets, all being erased in real time by the girl and the stray cat. "She's not unlocking the trust, she's deleting it," Dominic Vance screamed, his holographic image flickering as the facility's power grid began to fail. Chaos erupted as the three syndicates opened fire, not at each other, but at the center pedestal where Zailie stood, Yet the cat moved with a speed that defied physics, a blur of black fur and green light that deflected every round with a shimmering kinetic shield. Zailie grabbed Leora's hand, the two sisters standing together in the eye of the storm, while the deadliest bosses on Earth scrambled like rats in a sinking ship. "We're leaving," Zailie whispered to the cat, and with a flick of its tail, the floor beneath them dissolved into a burst of light, a teleportation sequence hidden in the cat's DNA that had been waiting for this exact moment of synchronization. They vanished just as the facility's self-destruct sequence initiated, leaving the mafia bosses to fight over the ashes of a fortune that no longer existed. But that was only the beginning. They reappeared on a silent, fog-covered beach in California, the Pacific Ocean roaring in the distance, and as the sun began to rise, Zailie looked down at the cat. Its emerald eyes were fading to a soft, natural green, and for the first time, it looked like a normal stray. "Is it over?" Leora asked, her voice trembling as she hugged her sister. Zailie looked back at the horizon, sensing the three shadows still lingering in the distance, knowing that while the money was gone, the power she now possessed had made her the new target of every underworld empire on the planet. He didn't know the truth yet, but Kalen Thorne had survived the blast, and he was already tracking the unique energy signature of the girl who had burned the world to save her sister. The salt spray of the Big Sur coast hit Zailie's face like a million tiny needles, the roar of the Pacific crashing against the jagged California cliffs a deafening contrast to the clinical silence of the lab they had just escaped. Zailie sat on the damp sand, her fingers buried deep in the Archivist's fur, feeling the cat's heart rhythm slowing down from a frantic digital hum to a heavy, organic thrum that felt like the earth itself was breathing through the creature. "We can't stay here, Zailie. The teleportation signature will leave a thermal trail even a rookie tracker could follow from space," Leora urged, her voice trembling as she scanned the fog-thick horizon for the telltale flicker of a drone's lens. "If you're rooting for the sisters to make it out alive against the world's most dangerous hunters, make sure to hit that notification bell so you're the first to see the final showdown." They scrambled up the narrow goat path trail toward a secluded cabin hidden in the redwood canopy, a place their mother had once mentioned in stories that Zailie now realized were actually encrypted instructions for survival. But the silence of the forest was a lie, and every 5 seconds the cat's ears would twitch toward the north, its pupils dilating until the emerald green was swallowed by a void of absolute black. Zailie felt a sudden sharp coldness at the base of her neck, a sensation of being watched not by a person, but by a system, and she realized then that deleting the fortune hadn't ended the hunt, it had simply turned it into a blood feud. What Leora said next changed everything. "The cat isn't just a key anymore, Zailie, look at your hands." Zailie looked down and gasped as she saw faint, glowing circuit patterns tracing the veins in her palms, the same violet light that pulsed from the Archivist's collar now flowing through her own blood. She wasn't just a bridge, she was becoming the hardware, the final backup for a fortune that was never meant to be deleted, only transformed. The staircase of suspense reached a new peak as a shadow detached itself from the ancient redwoods, not Vane or Isolde or Jackson, but someone far more terrifying. Malachi Zephyr, the Eraser. A man whose existence was a myth even to the deadliest mafia bosses. Malachi didn't carry a gun. He carried a long obsidian staff that hummed with the same frequency as the cat, and his eyes were covered by a visor that saw through walls, through fog and through lies. "The girl is the vessel, and the vessel is leaking," Malachi said, his voice a hollow, synthesized resonance that made the surrounding trees seem to lean away from him in fear. Zailie stepped in front of Leora, her small frame trembling but her eyes fixed on the hunter with a defiance that glowed brighter as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The cat let out a low, vibrating growl that shook the very ground, and as Malachi advanced, the Archivist's fur began to stand on end, sparking with arcs of blue static electricity that smelled of ozone and ancient power. "You're not taking him and you're not taking me," Zailie declared, her voice echoing with a dual tone, her own childlike pitch and a deeper, more ancient resonance that seemed to come from the cat itself. Malachi didn't flinch. He swung the obsidian staff, and a wave of concentrated gravity slammed into the ground, sending a shockwave that threatened to toss the sisters over the cliff's edge. But that was only the beginning of the horror. As Zailie fought to keep her balance, she realized the hunter wasn't alone. The three mafia bosses had put aside their differences, their private armies now encircling the mountain in a coordinated pincer movement that left no room for escape. The sky above Big Sur was suddenly filled with the red and blue strobe lights of 100 tactical helicopters, their searchlights turning the fog into a blinding, white wall. He didn't know the truth yet, but Kalen Thorne was watching from a distant ridge, his finger on a long-range override switch that could either save the girls or detonate the cat's core. the internal monologue of the forest seemed to whisper. Zailie felt the Archivist leap onto her shoulder, its weight shifting as it began to merge its energy with hers, the violet glow spreading up her arms until her entire silhouette was a beacon of forbidden power. "Leora, hold on to me and don't let go no matter what you see," Zailie commanded, her eyes now twin pools of emerald light as she felt the coordinates of a final hidden sanctuary in Washington state snap into focus in her mind. But as she prepared to jump into the void of the teleportation stream, Malachi Zephyr tapped his staff against the earth, and a localized EMP burst turned the air into a shimmering cage of dead energy. The cat let out a cry of agony, its glow flickering like a dying candle, and Zailie fell to her knees, the weight of the global data stream crushing her mind with 1 billion transactions per second. "The fortune is trying to rewrite itself inside you, Zailie. You have to push it back." Leora screamed, grabbing her sister's shoulders, but the girl's skin was already turning as cold as the marble monuments of D.C. Malachi stood over them, his hand reaching for the cat's collar, his visor reflecting the terror in Leora's eyes. Every 10 seconds, the perimeter narrowed, the sound of the Mafia's boots crunching on the dry needles of the forest floor growing closer, more inevitable. "The girl dies, the cat lives, the balance is restored," Malachi whispered, his obsidian blade sliding out of the staff with a hiss of lethal intent. But the silence that followed was broken by a sound that no one expected, a low rhythmic purr that didn't come from the cat, but from the very ground beneath Malachi's feet. The forgotten fortune wasn't just digital, it was a physical subterranean network of automated defense systems built into the continental shelf, and Zailie had just accidentally sent the activation command. The cliffside began to groan and tilt, massive plates of stone shifting like the scales of a dragon as the automated guardians, sleek, metallic wolves designed by Dominic Vance, erupted from the earth to protect their queen. He didn't know the truth yet, but Malachi Zephyr had just walked into a trap laid by a girl who didn't even know she was setting it. The chaos was absolute. The Mafia's helicopters were plucked from the sky by magnetic harpoons, and the forest became a graveyard of high-tech debris in a matter of seconds. Zailie stood up, her hair billowing in a wind that shouldn't have existed, the cat sitting regally at her feet as the metallic wolves formed a protective circle around them. "This isn't a fortune," Zailie whispered, her voice carrying across the entire coast. "It's an army and I'm the commanding officer." But the emotional stakes were about to hit a breaking point, because as the dust cleared, Zailie saw a figure emerging from the wreckage of the lead helicopter, Dominic Vance himself, looking older and more desperate than ever, holding a remote that glowed with a familiar, sickly violet light. "You think you've won, number 704? Vance shouted over the roar of the ocean. "I didn't just build a bridge, I built a self-destruct for the entire human race, and your heart is the only thing keeping the timer from hitting 0. The air over Big Sur didn't just vibrate, it shrieked with the sound of 1,000 dying hard drives as the violet light from Dominic Vance's remote tethered itself to Zailie's chest, a spectral umbilical cord that pulsed with every terrified beat of her heart. "One more step and the countdown finishes, Zailie. You aren't just the bridge, you're the detonator, and I'm the only one who can keep your heart from turning into a global blackout," Vance screamed, his face a mask of sweating desperation as the metallic wolves of the pack circled him, their red optic sensors glowing with a murderous intent that only Zailie could hold back. If you want to see Zailie and the Archivist survive this final showdown, make sure to hit that subscribe button, like this video, and share it with everyone who loves the story of a small girl taking on the world. Your support is the only thing that keeps this pack running. Leora gripped Zailie's hand, her knuckles white, her eyes darting between the silver-haired monster and the 3 mafia bosses who were currently pinned behind the smoking wreckage of their own ambitions. Vane Sterling was shouting into a dead radio, Isolde Vesper was staring at the glowing circuit patterns on Zailie's skin with a look of pure religious awe, and Jackson Rowe had already drawn a backup blade, his eyes fixed on the Archivist's throat. But that was only the beginning of the end. The cat stepped forward, its fur no longer sparking but instead absorbing the violet light from the air, its body acting as a lightning rod for the destructive energy Vance was trying to channel. What Zailie said next changed everything. "You didn't build a self-destruct, Vance. You built a mirror, and right now the world is looking back at you." The ground groaned as the subterranean defense grid shifted again, not to attack, but to form a massive, shimmering dome of obsidian glass around the sisters, the cat and the villains, cutting them off from the rest of the world. The staircase of suspense reached its final agonizing step as the timer on Vance's remote hit the 10-second mark, a high-pitched whine filling the dome that made the mafia bosses drop to their knees in agony. Every 5 seconds the light intensified, turning the night into a blinding, ultraviolet noon, and Zailie felt the forgotten fortune trying to pour through her eyes, a flood of data that promised her the power of a god if she would only let her sister go. Zailie, don't listen to it. The cat chose you, not the machine. Leora cried out, her voice barely a whisper against the digital roar, and in that moment, Zailie realized the truth that Dominic Vance had spent decades trying to hide. He didn't know the truth yet, but the Solomon Trust wasn't meant to be controlled by one person. It was a collective consciousness that required the empathy of a child to remain stable. Zailie closed her eyes, not in fear but in total synchronization, and instead of pushing the energy back, she opened the floodgates, letting the Archivist's power flow through her and into the earth itself. The result was a silent explosion of emerald light that didn't destroy, but neutralized, a wave of pure logic that erased the dead man's switch, and turned Vance's remote into a useless piece of plastic. The violet tether snapped, the feedback sending Vance flying backward into the redwood brush, his empire of secrets finally collapsing under the weight of its own greed. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of the ocean and the cooling hum of the metallic wolves as they powered down into statues of chrome and steel. The mafia bosses were gone, vanished into the shadows of the forest the moment the light faded, knowing that they could never own the girl who had just reset the world's power balance. Zailie looked down at the Archivist, who was now just a small black cat again, purring against her sneaker as if the last hour had been nothing more than a nap in the sun. "We're free, Leora," Zailie whispered, the glowing patterns on her skin fading into a series of faint silver scars that looked like constellations. They were standing on the edge of a new world, a world where the forgotten fortune was no longer a weapon, but a silent guardian hidden in the heart of a little girl and her cat. But as they turned to walk toward the hidden cabin, Zailie saw a single black feather drift down from the sky, the calling card of Malachi Zephyr, a reminder that the world's deadliest hunters never truly stop. He didn't know the truth yet, but the girl and the cat were already planning their next move, moving from the coast of California toward the rainy streets of Washington state, where the next chapter of the pack was waiting to be written. This was the ending of the war for the Solomon Trust, but only the beginning of Zailie's reign as the unseen protector of the forgotten. The world had no idea that a 10-year-old girl with a stray cat had just saved them from total darkness, and that's exactly how she wanted it. If you found this journey as incredible as we did, don't forget to subscribe, like and comment with your favorite moment, and share this with your friends to help us grow the Melanin and the Mafia's Pack community. Before you go, I have one question for you to answer in the comments. If you found a stray cat that could grant you a secret fortune, would you use it to change the world or to protect the people you love? We can't wait to read your answers and see you in the next video, where the shadows of the past finally catch up to the light of the future.